Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you here tonight and to share a presentation by Chris Williamson, who is actually head of Nienhuis for internationally, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
So not only is he housed in the Netherlands, he moves around internationally and has a chance to see how children across the world use Montessori materials. Chris is a father, and an interesting thing I learned about Chris is that he's a former professional soccer player. And now he uses Montessori principles to coach his son's soccer team. So he's not just someone who understands the Montessori materials, but he also knows how to apply the principles. Welcome, Chris. We're delighted to have you. And we are very interested in your topic, innovation makes a leader stand out. Welcome, Chris.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Judith. I'm the Global Brand Ambassador for Nienhuis. I'm in charge of the international sales network and Montessori network. So not only dealing with distributors, but also with all the Montessori associations across the globe. I'm also leading the product development team, and I am also working in the marketing department. So I have several hats on at Nienhuis, and in this capacity, I would like to speak to you this evening to share some of our history, some of our present, and also some of our future. The title of the presentation of this evening, of the webinar of this evening, is Innovation Makes a Leader Stand Out. I think there is an opportunity to ask just questions via the chat function, if you have any. And if you have any questions after the webinar, you can also send me an email to c.williamson@nienhuis.nl if you would like to know more about the things that I shared with you this evening. Innovation makes a leader stand out. Well, what did I mean with that title? Well, we all know that Maria Montessori was one of the biggest innovators in education. I think we all agree to that she was a really progressive lady that was way ahead of her time. She saw things in children that nowadays neuroscientists prove. So if we are talking about an innovator, well, Maria Montessori was an innovator. So that is also the title of my presentation. So Maria Montessori paid a lot of attention to detail when she was inventing her classroom materials. She wanted materials to be perfect, perfect in dimensions, perfect in color, perfect in aesthetics, and perfectly complete. And that was also the reason why she paid a lot of attention and she paid a lot of time looking for people to make those materials. And if I take you back to the early 20th century, let's say around 1914, when Maria Montessori visited the first Montessori kindergarten in the Netherlands, she saw very nice materials. She visited one of her students that took her course in Perugia, and she saw beautiful materials in that kindergarten. And of course, she wanted to know who made those materials. Who was the person that made those beautiful materials? And that appeared to be a carpenter living just around the corner, Mr. Albert Nienhuis. And of course, Maria Montessori decided to pay him a visit to see who this person was, and maybe that she could also work together with this carpenter. So that's what she did. And they started exploring some materials, developing some materials, designing some materials, and also manufacturing some materials. And slowly but surely, this cooperation seemed to work very well and led to a long alliance between Maria Montessori and this carpenter. In 1929, this activity for this carpenter became such a huge amount of his work that he decided to create his business around it. So that is the official moment that what was before called the Educational Material Factory became Nienhuis Montessori. So that was the same birth year as the AMI, which is a kind of special. So we always celebrate the same birthday. So in a couple of years, we will celebrate the 100 years anniversary together. Maria Montessori also decided to lay down all the material specifications in her blueprints because she thought it was very important to make sure that all the materials would also in the future, when she would be no longer alive, that the materials would be made according to her specifications, her how do you call it, her attention to detail and the precision she wanted. So these blueprints are still used by us as a AMI approved manufacturer to make sure that it is exactly in line with what Maria and later on Mario Montessori wanted. So that is a long way back, this relationship, and I can also share with you some interesting details from minutes between Albert Nienhuis and of a meeting held between Albert Nienhuis and Maria Montessori from 22, sorry. So this is a part of a book. This is written in Dutch language, so probably not possible for all of you to read. So that's why I made a couple of translations, and I took out a couple of interesting parts that might be appealing to you. So in these minutes, or in this meeting, Albert Nienhuis asked Maria Montessori, well, is it desirable to make rough and smooth in one color so that the children will not perceive a difference in color, but only in roughness? And to that question, Maria Montessori answered, well, to make rough and smooth in one and the same color is desirable, but not essential, because the children do the exercises with their eyes closed. So in this case, it was not that important to have a specific color. In other cases, and you will notice that, it was more important to have a specific color. The cylinder blocks, they discussed the cylinder blocks, where Albert Nienhuis asked, are the presented cylinder blocks precise enough? And Maria Montessori answered, well, the Dutch cylinder blocks are very adequate, especially because the cylinders go down very slowly. So it seemed like the air was moving when the cylinder was dropped or put into the hole. So she was happy with the quality of the cylinder blocks made by Albert Nienhuis. The long stairs, and nowadays we call them the red rods or the long rods, but in those days Maria Montessori called them the long stairs, which totally makes sense in my opinion. Albert Nienhuis asked, is the original color green now officially changed into red? And Maria Montessori answered, well, I have changed the green color, which I described in my first book, into red. The red color appeared to be more attractive for children of this age. So based upon her observations, what she always did, observe first and look at the children and how they reacted to certain materials, she changed the color green, which she initially gave the long stairs, into red. And I think that's a very remarkable thing that based upon what she saw in the classroom, she made changes to the materials. The color tablets, also an interesting one, because Albert Nienhuis asked her, well, should the color tablets be varnished or not? And then Maria Montessori answered, I can only approve the wooden color tablets because of the lower costs. The silk tablets remain my ideal, as long as the color does not fade. And during my experiments, it was the scintillation of the silk that attracted the children. And I would recommend to look for silk in Switzerland. So she also knew where to buy things. I also heard about Maria Montessori that she really loved very special objects, special fabrics, and all kinds of special things, and that she really was very keen on quality throughout her life. And this also was implemented in her material making. Also there, she chose very special materials. So in this particular case, she preferred silk tablets, and maybe this is a nice moment to say, well, wouldn't it be nice for Nienhuis to also start making the color tablets in silk again? Who knows? Who knows? The sound boxes. Is a red and blue pair, like presented in the UK, desirable, or is any choice of color for the pairs okay? Maria Montessori answered, well, red and blue, like it has been presented in the UK, and in those days, I think Barbara still knows that it was Philip and Tracy that made materials, the color presented in the UK wasn't essential, so she said any combination of colors will do. The metal insets. Albert Nienhuis asked, should the base of all shapes be 10 centimeters, or should some shapes be smaller, like a circle in England, which is 8 or 9 centimeters in? That was the fact in those days. Maria Montessori answered, well, the base diameter or size of all insets should be 10 centimeters. Smaller squares or circles of 8 or 9 centimeters, like in England or Germany, are not correct. So she had a very specific reason for them to be 10 centimeters. The sandpaper letters. Nienhuis asked, can you approve the sandpaper letters on pink and light blue boards? Where Maria Montessori answered, well, those colors are okay, as long as the sandpaper really stands out. But she also suggested, well, maybe black letters on a white background could also lead to a satisfactory result. So this was kind of, this became a standard throughout the years, but it could have been other colors as well. The numerical stairs, we have already seen the long stairs. Well, she also called them the numerical stairs. And Albert Nienhuis asked, do you prefer the lighter or the darker blue? And in the picture I show to you, I have taken the darker blue numerical stairs from our museum. And I made a picture of them and put them next to the current numerical stairs. And the reason why the color blue is lighter now is that is because of the fact that Maria Montessori preferred the lighter blue. Because for young children, the colors should be clear and attractive. And that's why, yeah, you see the difference, that it's more appealing to the children, most likely. When we look at the 4 characteristics of materials, that is the basis and the fundament of all the materials that are made in Montessori education. And Maria Montessori defined certain specific characteristics for the Montessori materials so that they would work better in the Montessori environment. One of those, and you've already heard a little bit about that in the minutes I just shared with you. One of those is aesthetics. Because of the fact that children have freedom of choice in the Montessori environment, the materials should, in a way, invite the children to start working. The materials should be very bright in color. They should be shining in order to make the children work with them and to invite them. So the aesthetics of the Montessori materials in Montessori environment is very important. Certainly because we have a peripheral education. Control of error is also a very important component of the Montessori materials. And you can imagine that if you look at the cylinder blocks, and the cylinders would grow because there is a humidity in the classroom, and the cylinders would get stuck, that would really screw up the deep concentration children can reach. So if the cylinders get stuck or they are too loose, then the materials might not work that well. So that is why we have decided to lacquer the cylinders all around and make sure that the cylinders stay in the same shape. Of course, extreme circumstances can make them change a little bit in size, but that is not happening a lot, and certainly not since we have lacquered the cylinders all around. So control of error is quite an important component of the Montessori materials. That is where we also pay a lot of attention to. Then there is an isolation of one learning objective. When you look at the pink tower, but also at this dressing frame, she isolated one learning objective per material. Nowadays, children are distracted a lot by all kinds of digital devices or screens, and we say, well, they have ADHD or HDHS, but it is also a problem caused by all these screens and devices. The children do not learn to concentrate anymore nowadays or to focus anymore. And that is what we do in a Montessori environment. And that is where the children can reach a very high level of focus, a high level of concentration. So this isolation of one learning objective is probably more necessary nowadays than it was in her days when she invented the materials. And then the last characteristic of the Montessori materials is that there are a lot of interrelations between the materials. And these interrelations come to effect when we look at cosmic education. Cosmic education, which we all know, is the idea that everything in the world is connected. We don't isolate subjects. We don't teach only math or language, but we teach them to the children, or we present it to the children in a way that everything is related and that we see the bigger picture, that we see the meaning of things. And the children also know why they are learning something. If we look at, for example, water or the climate change, we have to know also where the water is. So we have to look at the oceans, and we have to look at what's happening in the oceans nowadays, and what is happening with the oceans if the temperature is rising on the earth. So the interrelations and the bigger picture, to give that to the children is very important, and that is also what we try to do in the materials. We make connections between the materials, and these connections should be perfect. If we take, for example, a cube of the pink tower and we compare it with a cube of the binomial cube, they should be exactly the same size. And that's not so easy. Working with a material that is made of a natural material like wood, which is painted, sanded, painted again, sanded, painted again. So, and then still work with a tolerance of 0.1 millimeter per cube in 3 directions. So it is quite hard to make these materials in this perfect dimensions, like I already indicated earlier in my presentation. So the last characteristic of the Montessori materials are the interrelations. A prepared environment should not be a museum. A prepared environment should be a dynamic learning environment in which things change, things move, things are added, things are removed, new things are put on a different spot to attract the attention of the children, to create some of the new developments that children should encounter. So the prepared environment should definitely not be a museum. There should be structure, of course, but dynamics is also very important. Also, in the past, materials changed. You already have heard and seen that she changed the color of the long stairs. But in the course of time and the last couple of years, we also changed a few materials. Maybe you have noticed that we have changed the checkerboard from a screen printed board into a board with carpet. And this prevents the bead bars from rolling. And we all know the situation in the classroom that you're working with the checkerboard, or a child is working with the checkerboard, and some other child walks by and unconsciously hits a table, and all the bead bars start rolling on the board. Well, this was quite frustrating for the children. And that is also what we got back from the teachers working in the classroom. So for many years, we have been looking for a good material to prevent this a little bit. And nowadays we can print on carpet. So we have decided to print the squares on carpet and then glue the carpet into the boards. And I think this is a huge improvement and will satisfy the children working with this material. The stamp game. Well, in the past, it was difficult to get stamps that would have a very precise dimension. And if you would screen print the squares, these little stamps, sometimes the numbers were not perfectly centered. They were a little bit to the left or to the right, or a little bit to above or below. So that was a difficulty we were facing. Well, we tried laser cutting samples or stamps, and that didn't really work well. And at a certain moment, we decided to make them out of acrylic glass. And well, that was a choice. We also discussed that with the AMI, a material committee, and they said, well, this is a beautiful material. Why not try this? And when we did this, most Montessori teachers were not too happy about that. They said, well, we like the wooden stamps better than the acrylic glass stamps. And then we kept looking for alternatives, and then we found somebody who could really make the stamps in a beautiful way in wood for us. And that led to the moment that we now went back to wooden stamps again, and we hope that that satisfies the needs and the desire of all the Montessori teachers again. Also, the identical blue triangles changed. In the past, they were blue, so blue on one side and blue on the other side. And that seemed to be the international standard. And at some moment, I was looking into the blueprints, just going through them, and I noticed that the AMI Material Committee and the blueprints said that they should be blue-white or blue wooden color. And of course, I wanted to know what was the reason for this. So I got into contact with Jean Miller, an AMI trainer, 6 to 12, and she gave me a couple of PDF files with exercises one can do with identical blue triangles that are blue-white. So if you're interested in these PDF files, I can share them with you. Just drop me an email. I gave you my email address in the beginning, and then I will share these PDF files with you. And these are, yeah, very interesting exercises that you cannot do with identical blue triangles that are blue on both sides. So, as Montessori said, we all have a very friendly approach to error. Also, Nienhuis has a friendly approach to error, and we don't mind to say, well, we have made them in a wrong way for many years, at least not in the way Maria Montessori wanted them. So sometimes we still notice a few of those things, and we then immediately change them. The ball tracker. Yeah, the ball tracker has also been changed. This is a material for 0 to 3. And because of a conversation we had with Patricia Wallner, a 0 to 3 trainer, she indicated and gave some advice on how we could even improve the ball tracker. So in the past, there was a drawer, a small object permanence drawer. And Patricia Wallner said, well, that is not really necessary, but if you want to put object permanence into this ball tracker, you can also put a blind area where the ball ends in a tray. There's also a hole on the front, because when the child is sitting on the knees, or when the child is sitting on his simply sitting on his back, then the child can see that there is a hole and that the ball should be put in that hole. So the visible connection between where the ball should go and when the child is sitting was also made because of that. That is also an improvement. So for the 0 to 3 materials, because they are not that old yet, we continuously try to improve those materials for the 0 to 3 environments. The ImbuCare boxes, also for 0 to 3, the door has been replaced because in the past we noticed that children got stuck with their hands or with their fist into the holes of the doors, and the doors didn't really have a very important function. So we now replace that by a little bar where the shape or the solid would not roll out or fall out. And we also included a little piece of carpet in the box to prevent the noise in the classroom, because when many children in the classroom or A2I environment are working with materials, it can get rather noisy. So we have added quite a few materials. We have added carpet. And an advantage as well is that the wooden shapes don't get damaged that easily. The farm has also been changed. In the past, we had different components on the farm. And of course, we don't make those animals and all the components ourselves. We cannot make everything. So some things we have to source from other suppliers. And sometimes these suppliers change their assortment. And then we are really stuck as a Montessori manufacturer, because we need specific requirements of those components. They need to be in the right proportion. They need to have a lot of variety. So we have found another supplier that could offer us a variety of components. And we have included a tractor, for example, and a cattle feeder, and some animals, because they were no longer available, they had to be removed. So there's a selection of animals in the farm now, a little bit smaller selection, but instead of that, we have added some other components to do all kinds of language activities with. The cabinets have been changed. In the past, we had closed cabinets and they were not on wheels. And now we have cabinets that really enable the material to speak. One of the things I have talked about earlier is that the materials are very attractive and they need to invite the children to start working. Well, in order to let the material speak to the children, the cabinets should be very transparent. Well, you see that this cabinet is very transparent. You can look all the way through it. You can see the materials from 4 sides. And this really supports the work in a Montessori environment. And yeah, for logistical reasons, they are flat packed. So you can also buy them at a lower cost of shipping. And we have a base panel which can be flipped or which can be lifted with through 2 hinges, so that you can also put the cabinet on the brakes. So you can still roll it, you can put it on brakes, but you can also move it when the room needs to be cleaned or when you want to change a little bit of the structure in the room. So I think these cabinets are a huge improvement. So those were some new materials. Or some material changes, sorry. And we have also some new materials which we constantly develop, and I will share a few with you. Maybe you've heard about Montessori Sports. Montessori Sports is a very interesting method to do physical exercise in Montessori environments. In the past, it was always like traditional education where we would go 1 hour to a gym and do sports in a Montessori environment. Well, Montessori Sports has been developed by a few guys that were training the youth of Ajax Amsterdam. They were taking care of the talent development there, and they got into touch with Lynn Lawrence, the AMI CEO, whose son was playing at Ajax at that time. And of course, she was telling them a lot about how Montessori, the pedagogical approach of Montessori, could also help with helping young talents to develop their skills in football or in soccer. So that is what they did at Ajax, and they saw a huge change in the character and mentality of the children, of the talents, and to a point that a few years ago, Ajax had the youngest team in the Champions League, in the semifinals of the Champions League ever. So that is a proof that Montessori really helps children to become, at an earlier stage, to become an adult, to become more responsible. So these materials, the Montessori Sports Ball and the Sports Pump, are now developed also by these two guys who said, well, we can also use those principles while we are doing physical exercise in Montessori environments. Children can pick sandpaper letters, they can pick a cylinder block from the shelves, but they can also pick a ball and pump the ball like it's practical life exercise, where you have to use the pincer grip to inflate the ball. And once you are ready with your exercise, you can deflate the ball. But also do exercises during the life or the working cycle in the morning with the ball and the pump. And there are many more exercises that can be done on sports during the working cycle. So not going out for an hour of sports or physical exercise, but doing it during your working cycle in the morning. So that is also an activity that is based upon the interest of children. If you're more interested in Montessori Sports, you can also visit their website and look at the training program they offer, because I think, and especially like Judith said, the fact that I used to be playing professional football or soccer, whatever you call it in what country, I really can imagine how this could work for young children. And there is a change if you use this approach. We also added an infant toddler dressing frame for buckling, traditional buckling. We already had the side release buckling, but this is the traditional buckling, which we didn't have yet in our range. We have added many new practical life materials, which you can look up on our website, like enamel bowls, enamel pitchers, all kinds of materials to do practical life exercises with. And we will continue to look for nice materials that are hard to get in regular stores. We have created a lot of toddler puzzles. Also, this is very hard to get in the regular toy stores because the shapes are not in the right proportion when you buy them there. Sometimes the shapes are illustrated or they are cartoon-like, and as Montessorians, we always like to offer reality to the children. That is why we use real pictures on the puzzle, inset puzzles. And when we have an object like the apple here, several parts of that apple have a name. So it's also a language material where the children learn the names of the different, in this case, the different fruits, but they also learn the parts of that fruit. And there's a series with fruits like you see on the screen right now, but we also have vegetables, bats, wild animals, and farm animals. The Slatted Chair, I think this is really a beautiful chair which can be used for the toddlers. When we developed this chair, I also gave it to my brother-in-law, who just had a young child, and that child was around 1.5, 2 years of age, and had some troubles with movement. And then he had some physiotherapy, and the physiotherapist really saw this chair and said, "Where did you get this chair? Because in this chair, the child is sitting very, very properly. It is so ergonomic. You can realize that children of that age are always sitting on the tip of the chair. And this shape of this chair really pushes them to sit properly in the back of the chair. And they can pick it up easily, so they can easily move across the room. So I really am very proud of this little slatted chair. This is the side release buckling frame for the children's house, especially important for the Northern European countries where they are skiing or using these opening and closing method for a lot of their clothing. But also when you have a backpack, you have these side release buckling frames or the side release buckles. Sometimes we get comments of the Montessori community that when you work with the pink tower and you drop it on the floor or you drop it on the table, then it's chips. Well, we always say, and if you're trained properly and you really train your children to be very careful with these precious materials, then this is not that likely to happen, but still it happens. So that is why we have found very nice carpets. It's like felt with on the back side, it has anti-slide bumps. You can put it on the tables so that the materials, when they drop on the table, they don't chip that easily or they don't dent that easily. And this is a way of keeping the materials in a really good shape. Of course, I still think we need to teach our children to be graceful and very careful with the materials. But these desktop carpets surely will help to keep the materials in a good condition. The hollow letter shapes we introduced a little bit more than a year ago. And this is stemming from the discovery of the child. In the discovery of the child, Maria Montessori wrote that before she decided to make the sandpaper letters, she wanted to make boards with a groove, and then use a wooden rod to trace the letter. And this wooden rod would represent the instrument of writing. But in those days, this technique to make grooves in a board was not available. They didn't have that technique yet. So now we have this technique, we can make them. So we have decided to launch this item based upon the discovery of the child. And I think it's a very nice addition next to the sandpaper letters, because to connect the shape to the sound is very good to do with the sandpaper letters. And when you want to include the instrument of writing, then this would work very well. So you connect the sound to also the movement when you write. So it's a nice addition to the work you do with the young children in Children's House. We have added a continent carpet where you can do all kinds of exercise. And I know Montessori teachers are very creative in creating all kinds of exercises for the children with the continents. So you can combine this, for example, with the continent box, where you have the animals of all the continents and that live on particular continents. You can make nice combinations with that. You can compare it with a puzzle map of the world parts. You can compare it with the globe, but you also can go further in looking at the parts of the world where there is a high population or a lower population. So you can do all kinds of activities with this carpet on top of all the activities that are already there in the classroom. We have also launched the puzzle map of the seas and oceans. I think this is also a very nice addition. We have always focused On the puzzle maps, we've always focused on land and look at the land parts on the globe. And this is a nice way of presenting the water to the children. And we all know that water is becoming more and more important for the planet. So that is why we thought it would be interesting to also make a puzzle map of the seas and oceans. And later on, for the children's house, we also will launch, and that will happen next year, a puzzle map of only the oceans. And of course, we continue to develop new things. I could go on forever talking about those, and it's a continuous process, and it's one of the processes I like very much, to be creative with materials, to talk with experts, and to add things to the classrooms. But there's more we can do. What about observation and record keeping? We are focusing a lot as Nienhuis on making quality materials. Materials should be, like Montessori said, perfect in dimensions, perfect in shape, in aesthetics, and all the things she talked about when she was discussing materials. But she wanted quality education and quality Montessori education. And everything she did, she based upon observation. So observation was one of her pillars, one of her key components of her way of education. We should look at the children, and looking at the children and then decide what we would do to help the children in their development. So that is why Nienhuis also decided to support, and not to create, but to support an initiative to develop a very interesting observation and record keeping system. And the system is called Cfolio. Maybe you've heard a little bit about it already, but it is launched now in September in the Netherlands, the first version of it. And about 15 schools are now working with Cfolio in the Netherlands. And the first experiences are very positive. And what makes Cfolio a little bit different? Because there are also some already some record keeping systems and observation systems on the market. And what we have seen so far is that those applications focus a lot on events in the classroom. That means that they focus on, okay, did I give a presentation, or did a child work with a material? And when you look at observation, that is not in line with what you want to observe. You want to observe development within the children. And the materials, for example, are only an instrument that leads to knowledge or that leads to skills. And it is not the goal itself. A presentation is not a goal. The presentation is an instrument. The materials are an instrument that helps the children to develop. So we wanted to work on an application to keep track of development of knowledge and skills instead of keeping track of events. And that is one of the main differences between Cfolio and the other applications that are on the market. And we also have heard that formative evaluation in regular education is becoming more and more important as well. We don't want to do summative evaluation. We don't want to take tests, especially not as a Montessori school. So it is very important to apply formative evaluation when you want to keep track of the development of children. So based upon an observation note, a teacher makes decisions on what intervention to make in the prepared environment. And when a certain development is completed, this can be documented. So it is about the interventions you plan after you have seen important behavior happening with a child. And that is when you act as a teacher. And then you come to the pedagogical didactical core process in the classroom. where this observation note you make, sometimes you make a blog where you write down a lot of things, what you're seeing in the classroom, and then you decide the important things you have written down, what you want to use and start working with. And those important decisions, these important observations can be called an observation note. And based upon that note, you make a choice. And that choice can be, yes, to give a presentation. But sometimes it's even more important to simply wait and to be conscious that you have to wait. Or you have not seen enough and you make a goal-oriented observation. So you plan a targeted observation. So you're going to look very specifically on that particular part which you have seen. An important intervention can also be to start evaluating with a child. So you ask questions or you give feedback. I see that you're working with the color tablets. Can you explain me what you're doing? Or I see that you are laying down the color tablets from light to dark. Is it working for you? So talking with a child is also very important. And the last, but certainly not least, intervention you can plan is, like I already said earlier in the presentation, you can adapt the prepared environment a little bit. So you can make little changes, slight changes in the prepared environment to change the behavior of the children. So this model of interventions is the toolbox you have as a teacher. And we should avoid that when a child picks up a material, we immediately give a presentation, because then we are applying traditional education in Montessori or with Montessori materials. And that's something we should not do. Now, based upon a sequence of interventions and a sequence of choices you have made as a teacher, you see that a child has acquired a certain skill or has acquired certain knowledge. And that is something you want to document. And that can happen, that documentation can happen after this sequence of interventions, but it can also happen immediately. Sometimes you simply miss things as a teacher. And you cannot see everything what is happening in the classroom, or you cannot see all the things that are happening in the child's brain. Sometimes a child can even learn something by looking at others, and then they are not really showing any actions, but at a certain point, they show you that they have acquired a certain skill or knowledge. And then you can document directly. So there's a possibility to document directly, and there's a possibility to document after a sequence of interventions. And this is called the pedagogical didactical core process in a Montessori environment. So I've just talked about the core process and the interventions you can plan as a teacher, but you also would like to know a little bit, how do we document the development of the children? And in Cfolio, the decision has been made to create a relation between the learning content and the revised taxonomy of Bloom, which is an evidence-based model to classify educational learning objectives into levels of complexity and specificity. So if you look at those taxonomies, there are 3 of them. Of course, in traditional education, the cognitive domain is very important, but in Montessori education as well, of course. What we have extra is the affective domain and the psychomotor domain, where we really focus on as Montessorians. If you look at the cognitive domain, there are different levels of cognition. When you look at the lowest level of cognition, it is remembering. And when you come to the highest level of cognition as a child, that is creating. Then you are performing on metacognitive level. And if you're working on remembering, you are performing on factual knowledge. So connecting the learning content to the cognitive domain, so the complexity, the level of complexity in cognition is automatically done in the application. We also have included the affective domain, which is the way you empathize as a child. So it is about receiving up to internalizing. And the psychomotor domain, which is the level of coordination, starts with imitation and ends with naturalization. So these are the taxonomies used in Cfolio to connect the learning content to a certain level. There are several learning domains, like, for example, building of the person, language, motor skills, mathematics and algebra, geometry, science, art and culture, and society and citizenship. So those are the learning domains present now in Cfolio. And if you would like to learn more about it online, you can go to cfolio.com, but I can also show you a little demo. I want to share this application a little bit with you and see how it works in practice. Well, if you look at the left side of the application where it says in Google Translate, so it should be observation note, scheduling, and the timeline. And register would mean in proper English documenting, and the overview is well translated. So in the left-hand side, so here where I'm with my cursor, there the core process of the pedagogical, didactical core process of the teacher takes place. So we can pick a child. For example, we choose Lou. And we type an observation note. Well, let's take the example of the color tablets. Lou is working with the third color box and is grading from light to dark. So that is what you have seen. And it's always something without interpretation. And when you make an observation note, it is not your interpretation what you write down. It should be something you actually see. Because otherwise you start assuming things, and that is not what you want to do when you are observing. Well, you choose a learning area. Is it personalization? Well, I don't think so. Language. This fits into motor skills and perception. So I click on that button. And you plan your intervention. And this is a goal-oriented intervention. You can say, well, you can decide to wait. You can decide to observe. You can decide to give a presentation. Here it says instruct, but in proper English, it should say to give a presentation or to evaluate. And you can decide to adjust the environment. Well, let us simply decide to wait and look more carefully. You choose a date. Well, I'm going to plan that on Wednesday. And until that moment, I have a signal in my schedule that I've seen this. And when the child is working again with the color tablets and is grading the colors, maybe I can see more. Well, if you look in the schedule, and you see all the interventions you have planned, you also find the last intervention of Lou. It is Lou Smith on the 1st of December. I should wait, and something has happened on the motor skills and perception, and it was about the third color box. That is the observation note I made. Well, when you have seen this, you can also plan a new observation note because you have waited, and you can type Lou is successfully grading all the colors of color box 3. That is what you have noticed. And then you can evaluate. You can choose to evaluate. And you're going to do that on Friday, and you plan it. So in your schedule, you see that on Friday, you have to have a little conversation with Lou about his work with the color box 3. And when you have talked to Lou and you've noticed that, well, he completely understood this, then you can say, my interventions are complete, and I can move on to documentation part. In the timeline, you can see everything that happened on a certain learning area in the classroom, on all the interventions. So you can filter on interventions, so all the things you did with instructing, or you can remove the filter. You can choose a child, for example, Lou, and you see all the things that happened, all the development that took place, or all the interventions you've seen, you've made with Lou. So you have an overview per learning area, per intervention, or per child. Well, I just said, well, we knew enough of the activity Lou did, so we can move on to documenting that. We are going to the documentation part, which takes place in the right-hand side of the application. So we choose Lou again, and we are choosing the learning area he was working on, which was motor skills and perception. Then you have a sub area. It can be large motor skills, it can be gross motor skills, it can be fine motor skills, or sensory motor. In this case, it is about sensory motor. And we have a lot of things that are in that content, in that sub-content of sensory motor. And you have names, quality, the sub-area, names, quality, and contrast, names of equality, names of gradation, until sensory synthesis. And you also see here that every sub-area is connected to a part of knowledge in the taxonomy. So the names of quality and contrast are, let's say, the lower level complexity of the taxonomy of Bloom. So it is about remembering and naming, but it can also be a higher level. So sensorial discrimination of characteristics, which is about understanding, or sensory analysis, which is about analyzing. So here, the connection between the learning content and the taxonomy of Bloom is automatically made. So in this, my particular example, it is about names of quality and contrast, and it was about colors. So if we say we are going to document this part on the 11th or the 30th of November, then this is documented right now. And we look in the overview, and we go to Lou, and we go to this area, sensory motor, and we see that Lou has already mastered colors and dimensions. So in this way, we really make sure that we follow the child not based upon their grades, we follow the child based upon, for example, complexity and cognition, because the learning content is automatically linked to the taxonomy. And we see at a certain moment that, for example, Lou is performing on the lower levels of cognition, always. So he doesn't get much higher. So what can we do to bring him to a higher level? Maybe he's a little bit afraid of doing more complex things. So how can we open up this potential Lou has to reach a higher complexity in cognition? But maybe Lou is simply a child that doesn't reach that higher level of complexity in cognition. And Lou is very good in his psychomotor skills. So on that area, he performs much better. Every child is different. So it is good to keep track of that and to see, okay, how can I stretch the capacity of the child? How can I bring the child to a higher level? And sometimes that's not possible, and that's something we need to accept. So this is how more or less the application works. And when you have an overview like this, where Lou has done several things, has showed you certain developments, you can show that to the parents. You can talk about it with the parents, because when you talk with the parents, okay, Lou worked with the color box tree, the parents have no clue what you're talking about. But if you are talking about naming colors or naming colors and contrast, then the child, okay, then the parents can really understand what you're talking about. So you connect the learning content and you make an overview of all the learning content Lou has achieved. And that is something you can talk about with the parents, but also with the school inspection, for example. The school inspection most of the time has no clue of what is happening in a Montessori environment. All the children are doing something different. All the children are working on a different place. One is on the floor, the other one is on the table, others sit in the hallway and work together. What is happening here? What are the children doing? And how do I know, as a school inspector, where the children are in their development? Well, such an application can help with that, because the language which is used to document is the same language the school inspection speaks. So you use your own Montessori methodology in your classroom, and you can show how you reach what you should reach to the school inspection. I hope this is a little bit clearer now how this application works, and we will continue to develop this. It will be improved, the things that are already there. In the near future, we will also include the core concepts of the materials, so that the materials are also connected with the learning content, so that you know, okay, these materials, using these materials, a child can work on this area, this learning area. So that is something we will add, and there will also be a child portfolio where the child will be made responsible for its own learning process. So that is another dimension which we will add to the application in the near future, so that the children also become more responsible for their learning. But I think this is already a very nice start, which can help the teacher becoming aware of what they're doing. So what interventions do I plan? And also discuss that with the team members, discussing it with the colleagues. Okay, in those particular cases, I have planned this intervention. What did you do in those cases, or what would you recommend in those cases? So it can also be a management tool or a reflection tool for the teacher. Enough about Cfolio. So maybe there are some questions people want to ask, and we can talk about after this presentations. Maybe you want to know a little bit more. Maybe you have other questions which I didn't discuss this evening, which you want to ask. So feel free. Maybe Judith can manage that a little bit.
Yes, if you would put your questions in the chat, if you would send them to me, then I can sort through them and ask them of Chris, so we can have a little bit of order in this. It was a lot of information, Chris, to take in.
Yes, I'm
really,
sorry for that.
No, it was really interesting, and I liked the way you organized it, starting with Montessori as an innovator and giving the historic details of the development of the materials, and then showcasing how you, as Nienhuis Montessori, have continued in that spirit and have taken both, gone back to some of her writings to innovate materials that had been missing, and now the use of technology in giving us a tool for observation and documentation. Really interesting. You've come full circle.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're all taking in a lot of information, and probably it has to sit with us for a while. I guess that's called waiting, and then we process it and come back with questions. Chris put his email address in the very first set of slides, so you can reach out to him directly, and we will also be sharing that with this recording, if any of you would like to also revisit this recording. And I want to introduce Barbara Isaacs, who's here as well tonight, and she is the president of Montessori Europe. Barbara, do you have some closing words?
Thank you very much, Judith. I would like to thank Chris for this very informative presentation. There is much food for thought. I very much liked the reflection and the dialogue about the development of the materials, because I think that dialogue needs to continue today. And I have found your observational tool fascinating, and it would be lovely to hear more from teachers who are using it to see how it works for them. I hope that everybody will be inspired by your presentation to want to know a little bit more. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight.
Yes, I see some questions coming by, Judith.
So about how you implement Montessori in your football game in 30 seconds or less.
Okay, well, I can do that in 30 seconds or less. Well, what I do in the training of my son, for example, is that older children work with younger children. So it's not one age group that trains together. There are several age groups that training together. I also let them make their own choices. So we are not only instructing them, you have to train this move, or you have to exercise this move. You can also ask the child, well, is there a move you think you need to practice, and then practice that move, so they have the freedom of choice. The competition is less important, so we don't want them only to focus on winning. We also want them to focus on developing their skills. So when you have a game against an opponent, and that's another team of another club, you can say, well, we want to win this game. That's an option. But what I prefer to do is, okay, what is your goal in this game? What would you like to achieve? What would you like to show us? And then let them be aware and conscious of the role they're going to play in that game. So not only focusing on winning and being better than somebody else, no, focusing on yourself and developing your own skills as a football player or soccer player. 30 seconds.
Excellent. And another question on, have you ever considered adding new materials to your catalog that would allow children to capture or document sounds, like a camera or sound recorder?
No, we have not. So that's an interesting question. We have never really thought about that. But that could be something interesting to develop, whereas I'm always, and it depends a little bit on the age group, I'm always a little bit careful of including too much technology in a classroom of young children, because in this age group they're really focusing, or should be focusing, on their primary skills. So like fine motor skills, gross motor skills, their language development. But adding sounds and video, might be interesting to discover. I couldn't really think of a way how to do that, but if there's anybody that has an idea, we are always willing to listen.
Thank you, Chris. And a question about the metacognitive knowledge included in the C folio. How is it organized?
Well, that is the highest level of complexity in the cognitive taxonomy, the taxonomy of Bloom, that is the highest level. So when a child is able to create something with what the child has learned, so to create something new, and the child is showing that, then the child really has understood that particular concept. And the highest level, if you look a little bit closer, and maybe we can also go into that on a later stage when somebody is interested, we can show you what learning areas are defined as being the metacognitive level. So that is most of the time the highest level in cognition, which is linked to this learning content. Yeah.
It's really an intriguing system. I'm going to play with it online. It seems like we've exhausted the questions and we've gone over. So I also want to add my thank you to you, Chris. I really found this extremely interesting and engaging. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And also I want to thank you as Nienhuis for your support of Montessori Europe. The sponsorship that you helped provide to Montessori Europe has enabled us to organize and post a new website. So it's been a great help. Thank you for your support as the sponsor of Montessori Europe.
Yeah, and thank Montessori Europe for, because I know that all volunteers that are running the organization, and I think we really should appreciate these volunteers and making it possible that all the Montessorians in Europe, no matter if they have a rich background or a poor background, they can join in this association, this organization, can participate in conferences, sometimes offline and sometimes online, hopefully offline soon again. And I think you have created a platform where people can meet, can exchange experience, can inform, can learn, and can share, which is very important for the Montessori society and Montessori community, because I know when you're working at your own little pace in your own little classroom, sometimes you feel a little bit alone, and of course you have colleagues, but it is also nice to talk to other schools, other people that are working in this field, and sharing information and sharing knowledge. So that is a big thank you to you too, Montessori Europe, Judith and Barbara and all the people involved, because you enable this.
We're a great team.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you. We're getting lots of appreciative comments from the audience. So thank you for enlightening us today.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Bye-bye.